Welcome to Nite Callers Archives. Before Nite Callers became a vidcast on YouTube and Facebook, it was a live call-in show on Blog Talk Radio. We did things a little differently back then. It was a different time in the Bigfoot world. There were only a few podcasts, and Bigfoot was still taboo to talk about. We didn't have the TV shows, hundreds of Bigfoot groups and conferences, or funny memes that we have now. They were different times, folks. We've had many amazing hosts and knowledgeable guests over the years that helped get the Bigfoot community to where it is now. We hope you enjoy these older shows, as they are a phenomenal source of information and good times. If you hear a guest or host that you would love to see back on the current Nite Callers, please drop a comment. Enjoy the show.
Good afternoon, everyone. On this April 5th, 2009, welcome to Nite Callers. My name is Laurie Phillips, and I'm here with my co-host, Tennessee Cherokee, and our little co-host, Miss Laurie, is here helping us today, and we're just thankful to be here, and so glad that all of you have made it in tonight. How are you doing tonight, Tennessee?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. I have been sick for a week, but I think I finally just about kicked it. I have too. I've been sick for a couple of days. I think there's just something really bad going around the country, and we're hundreds of miles apart and both got the same thing. Now, how does that happen? Must be we're catching it over the phone, or It's a bad virus. I think it's an atypical flu virus, because I had a flu shot this year in October, and I started off having a real bad chills, and then I ran a fever for 3 days. Pardon me, and I had all those severe body aches and just really, really malaised feeling, but I'm on the other end of it, I hope.
Oh, that's good. That's good, because we can't have both of us sick. I've still got a sore throat, so I'll do the best I can tonight. I thought I had some lemon juice around here somewhere, but can't find it. So we'll just get by. I wanted to let everyone out there know that this Thursday night at 7 o'clock we're doing a Pledge of Allegiance to the Lamb. It's a program that we are pre-recording for Sunday so that we can be off this Easter weekend, and we're asking everyone that if they would just call in, give their name, and say they pledge allegiance to the Lamb. And if they want to give testimony or prayer, that would be awesome. We're also going to be playing gospel music. And I know this is extremely unusual for a Bigfoot-related show to do this, but without the Lord, I don't believe this show would be here tonight. So we want to take some time and give thanks to our Father on Easter, that special day. So anyway, we're encouraging everyone to be there Thursday at 7 o'clock on this Nite Callers radio show. And tonight, we have a really, really special guest. Her name is Kathy Moskowitz-Strain, and she has written a wonderful book, which I have not had the chance to read, but I've had a lot of people tell me it is awesome. Received her Bachelor Associates, is that a BA, is Bachelor Associates? So anyway.
It's a Bachelor of Arts.
Okay. I am going to totally mess this up, but I'm going to try my best. In anthropology and MA in behavioral science, emphasis anthropology, from the California State University in Bakersfield. She is currently the Forest Heritage Resource and Tribal Relations Program Manager for the Stanislaus National Forest. Now, how do you say that, Kathy?
You said that right, Stanislaus.
That is located in the Sierras, isn't it?
Yes,
Kathy?
in California, yes.
Okay. Kathy has been a professional archaeologist and anthropologist for 20 years. and has conducted research and field work on the hairy man for nearly as long. The book is basically about the stories that she has heard from the Native American tribes. Many of the stories involved are fearsome creatures with supernatural powers. I've heard this before from the Native Americans, that they don't believe that the Sasquatch are even flesh and blood, that they are a spiritual entity. We're going to go ahead and go to Kathy now and let her tell us about her book and how she got started. How did you, an archaeologist, Kathy, fall into the realm of Bigfoot, basically? How did that happen?
Well, it's actually because of Bigfoot why I became an anthropologist. When I was a little girl, I saw the movie Legend of Boggy Creek, and I was just overwhelmed by it. You know, I believed that this was a real animal, and, you know, I was born and raised in the Sierras, and so I was very familiar with the outdoors, and I probably have been camping in every state in the United States except for the eastern seaboard. And so I was very intrigued by this animal that was in this movie and possibly out there. And my dad was always a wonderful influence on me. When we'd go to the mountains and stuff, we'd pretend like we were Bigfoot hunting, you know, 2 feet from the camper. And so later on in school, I asked my teacher, you know, I want to study this animal. What do I need to do? And she was, you know, didn't laugh at me or anything. She said, well, I think you probably have to go into anthropology in order to study this animal. And I said, fantastic. And so that's what I did. Of course, I figured it out really quick that science didn't accept that Bigfoot was real. But by then, you know, I'd already fallen in love with archaeology and anthropology and saw how Bigfoot would fit into that. And so that's what I got my degree in. And it's just always been a part of my life. Archaeologists are always in contact with Native American people, and when I would work with them, I would talk about Bigfoot, and I would talk about, you know, about this animal, and so they always felt very comfortable telling me their traditional stories and their traditional beliefs, and especially around where I was born and raised is Porterville, California. And it's kind of in the middle of the state, in between Bakersfield and Fresno. People probably don't know where that is, but there's a tribe there that are the Yokuts, and they live on the Tule River Indian Reservation, and they have a pictograph, which is a painting that is very, very old. We have photographs of it from the late 1800s. I remember when I was in high school, we knew all those kids that lived up there, and I went up there and I saw it, and they told me this story about that hairy man helped create the tribe. You know, that was he was a creator, along with, you know, coyote and other animals that were in the cave. They painted themselves as kind of a memory, so humans would never forget them. So that was also a big influence on me, where I thought, well, you know, I'm not the only one that believes this. You know, there are other people who believe that Bigfoot is real, and we didn't have a great deal of Bigfoot sightings in that particular part of the Sierras, but there were a few. The Indian Reservation had one like in 1979 that made all the papers, and, you know, there were other ones that just didn't get the same publicity, and so it just set me on this path of essentially I have to work for a living, so anthropology and archaeology provides that living, but my true interest is Bigfooting, and so it's a good blend because I get to go out in the field a lot. I'm outside all the time. I get to talk to Native people all the time, and
it
so
sounds wonderful.
It is, and I like archaeology. I mean, I like playing in the dirt. You know, if I'm not outside playing in the dirt, I get kind of grumpy after a while. So I'm a huge gardener and stuff. But the book came about when, you know, I had been gathering. And the stories that I gather are traditional stories. So, you know, you can go to most tribal lands and talk to people today, and they'll tell you modern stories. And so what I was looking for were stories that modern culture. So the newspapers in 1950, when Jerry Crew, you know, found the footprints in down at Willow Creek, and all of a sudden you have Bigfoot everywhere. Okay, so
right.
that can influence people whether they want it to be or not. That has an influence on what you think and what you believe. And so what I was looking for were stories that predated that. So stuff that anthropologists, as immigrants spread across the United States and entered new places, with those people were anthropologists who talked to these Native people and wrote these things down, in 1700s, 1800s. And most of that stuff, some of it's published, some of it's not, some just sits in notes in museums and stuff. And so that was the stuff I was interested in, things that predated modern culture, except with this term Bigfoot. I wanted to know, what did tribes believe before that? And so diving into that, there's tons of it. There's just tons of stuff that's out there that Native Americans would describe. Of course, they didn't use the term Bigfoot, and I hear that a lot from people. Well, how come blah, blah? Well, that's our term for it, that they had their words for this animal, and they have stories that go with it. And, of course, their stories, it's hard to get through them because a lot of times they talk, but all animals talk in Native American stories because it's kind of a boring story if you don't have an eagle talking to the mouse. That's how you tell a good story. It's nothing different than some of our modern fairy tales kind of things where you just got to get some excitement in it, And so that's what the book is literally verbatim these stories that are roughly from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. I give an introduction of the tribe, who they are, who are they associated with, what that tribe's traditional word for Bigfoot is, and then these stories that go with it. And what I didn't want to do was interpret it for you. And so I think that when you have books that give you 2 lines from this traditional story and then they tell you what to think about it, people are intelligent. You can make up your mind if this story is about Bigfoot or not. That's for you to do. And so it's got about 60 tribes from all across the United States. There's about 150 stories, I think. I don't remember now if I counted them up ever. And the power of all of these stories together is that you can see so much similarity. So you'll read a story from California that sounds very much like a story from Alabama. And that is what gives it so much power.
Well, do you think it's the same story, kind of like the grapevine effect, that it just, like someone from this tribe traveled to Alabama and brought that California story with them? Or do you think that they were experiencing the same things? Or how do you account for that? I mean, that they were similar?
One of the things we know about Native, and that's how the great archaeology comes into all this, is that we know a lot about Native American people and how what they did in prehistory. So we know what things were traded. You can find obsidian that they made, projectile points that come from, the desert. We find them here in California. You find seashells that came obviously from the ocean. You find them into the valley. But the movement is very limited. You don't find California shells in Alabama. That's just not how trade works. It's very limited trading. And most of the time when tribes came together to trade, it's very brief interaction because they're different people. Most tribal words that, like Choctaw or Yokits, means the people. They all believe they're the original people, and all these other tribes are kind of sort of leftovers. And so they don't really want to interact with them a whole bunch. It's here, I need this from you, give it to me, and I'm giving you this in exchange, and then you're leaving. So the chances of them sitting there and really exchanging ideas, and especially religious ideas, or even more so a story about an imaginary animal, is very unlikely. I mean, I'm not going to sit with somebody who lives in Texas, sit down, and my interaction, I've got 8 hours at the most to negotiate and get some stuff back and forth of what I need from you. I'm just not going to spend the time to tell you about some animal I made up who only means something to us. And so to me, what it means is that they're all experiencing the same animal, and I think that's pretty conclusive. If you read through all those stories, you're going to be going, oh, that makes a lot of sense that this is the same animal.
Can you tell us one of the stories that you've heard without giving too much away to the book?
Yeah, actually
maybe one of your favorites.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Oh, and I guess I wanted to go back and say that how the book really came to be was that I had been gathering this stuff from the Pacific Northwest, but when several years ago, Craig Woolheater from the Texas Bigfoot group asked me to get some stuff, gather stuff from the east and the south, and so when I saw how much there was, I kind of said, ooh, this stuff needs to be all put together. And so that's kind of how that book came to be, and that's where I started seeing the coincidences, not the coincidences, the similarities in different stories from all across the United States. But probably my favorite story is Bigfoot is always very distinctively in these stories male or female. So they'll talk about her, with very obviously a female Bigfoot, and you have male Bigfoots. And one of the similarities that you have across the United States is this Bigfoot that wears a basket on its back. And so the basket is there because frequently he or she is picking up children who are bad, putting them in their basket, and then they take them home and they eat them. And not all the time they eat them. Sometimes they raise these children as their own children. So a female Bigfoot who doesn't have any kids is very likely to go steal a child and then make it her child. And enough so that sometimes that child doesn't even know that they've been kidnapped because, they're so young. And plus, some of those stories make it sound like how that Bigfoot lives is very similar to how humans live. And so, but my favorite story is one that takes place. It was never published prior to the book, and it is found. Actually, hold on, it is in the book. Yeah, it is in the book. I'm trying to remember because I've gathered so many stories since the book's been published. I can't remember sometimes what's in and out. But what it involves is that two Native people, a father and his son. The father warns the son not to go into Bluff Creek, not to go, where the famous movie was taken. Don't go down in there because there's a female Bigfoot that lives down there, and she will steal you and make you her husband. And the son goes, oh, yeah, sure, I'm not afraid of this Bigfoot at all. I can take her. So, of course, being a teenager, I'm assuming he's a teenager, and
I hope he was.
Probably a teenager, goes down to Bluff Creek, and sure enough, the female Bigfoot captures him and makes him into her husband. And so he's like, and you get the impression that he's really not having a good time and, would prefer to be someplace else. And so he decides one day to run away from her, and so he's going to escape. And so he's leaving Bluff Creek, and he's going from village to village to village going, hide me, this Bigfoot lady wants me as her husband. And they're all going, too bad, we're not going to help you. We don't want to make her mad. We're afraid of her. You just have to leave. And so he's going from village to village to village and getting no help whatsoever. And finally he reaches the coastline there, so by Eureka. And she is so mad at this point, she's had enough. And so she says, if I can't have you, nobody's going to have you. And so she picks up a stone. It's known as a pestle. So it's what Native women use to break up acorns and stuff. You see those mortar holes and stuff. She picks it up and she throws it at him. And, of course, she wants to kill him. And we've all heard those stories about how Bigfoot throw rocks and stuff. Anyway, she misses because he ducks his head and it flies out into the ocean. And it's still there, and there's a word for it. They call it redding rock. And so when you see this redding rock, that's what it is. That is the rock that Bigfoot threw to kill her husband. And so I love that story because it's not only is it about Bluff Creek, but it literally has a landscape feature that's associated with Bigfoot. So it's not, and then there's a lot of stories like that where, that cave right there, and it's still got that name, but there's a story that goes with it from the 1800s where that cave belonged to Bigfoot. Or, this mountain feature is part of Bigfoot. There's lots of stuff like that. And so if Bigfoot's imaginary, why would why in the world would Native Americans take the time not only to make up a story, but then to even make up how that rock got out there? I mean, it may be, why not just say coyote threw it, or why not eagle? There's so many other things that it could be associated with. So,
exactly.
yeah.
We have one question, Kathy,
Sure.
if you could answer it for one of our listeners. East Texas Squatch Hunter would like to know if you could give us some of the different names that the tribes gave Bigfoot.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that I do provide in the book, because it's always expanding, is I have an index, an appendix that's got all the Native American names for Bigfoot, both by the name itself and then by the tribe. And then what does it translate into meaning? And some of the translations are pretty interesting. Probably my favorite word is Dawanka. She is a female Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia area, and she has a son, and his name is Bukwas, and her name is Wild Woman of the Woods or Whistling Woman of the Woods. She's often depicted in masks and totem poles as whistling, because that's when she whistles, she has a thing for human males. She likes to marry them. And it's always very proper. So there's no out of marriage hanky-panky going on. So she marries them in her mind. But in order to in order to lure you over, she offers you gifts. But when you hear her whistle, that's why a lot of Native American people always tell you never ever go outside if you hear whistling, because that's a Bigfoot and something bad is going to happen. And so that's a kind of a universal belief. And I've actually been with Native people before on reservation land, and they've cautioned me straight, do not go outside if you hear whistling. And I go, why? And in the past, a lot of times they wouldn't tell me, but, I've gotten, to say, I know what you mean. I know that you're cautioning me against a Bigfoot. And they'll go, yeah. So anyway, that's how she's depicted. So that's one of my favorite names. Goodness, I'm looking through some of these words, of course, I can't say because they're very difficult to pronounce, and I'm not that great at doing it. But there's there's so many here. Lufa is a name from the Chickasaw, and that means smelly, hairy being. And so that's an interesting name for a Bigfoot. There's a Matlock that is Alaskan, and that means hairy giant. And so a lot of hairy is in a lot of the words, giants in a lot of the words. In the Paiute have a Numamic is his name, and that just means giant. Cannibals also in a lot of their names, and that's where the title kind of for the book came from, that it's, giants, cannibals, and monsters, because that's frequently how they're described, as being a giant cannibal, type monster type thing. So did I answer his questions? There's Yayali, there's Yeehaw.
I think so. Skookum, that is a tribal name too, isn't it?
Correct, yeah, and that's from around the Mount St. Helens area. And those are some great stories too, because and there's also like stick Indians that they refer to, and that's a term that they use in that same general area. And a lot of people don't know that Spirit Lake, which is below Mount St. Helens, which of course was devastated when Mount St. Helens went off. People wouldn't go up there because these mountain devils, these skookums, basically had taken over that area, and so they just wouldn't go up there anymore, because you just essentially would run into a Bigfoot no matter what you did. And so they just decided it was just better to stay out of there. They just gave it to them. So
I have another question for you.
Sure.
Driver says, could you please ask Kathy, do modern Native Americans believe that ancestors applied supernatural explanations to behaviors about Bigfoot they just could not figure out rationally?
Oh yeah. I think that all of us, no matter who you are, we all view the world based on what our experiences, what our knowledge, what our education is. And so, like, my grandmother would never accepted that we went to the moon, because it just, in her mind, it wasn't possible. She barely liked cars as it was, because of how she grew up, and she used to call movies talking picture shows, because that's her form, her knowledge base is all based on what she learned growing up, and I don't think she made it past 6th grade, and that's your worldview. And so if I see something out on the landscape, and of course Native Americans, you're an expert in the landscape. Everything you need to survive is there on the landscape. So if you see something that you have no explanation for, you've never seen it before, it's either an animal you haven't seen, it's a behavior you haven't seen, it's something. All of us need an answer for that. That's just who we are. If we see something weird in the sky, you just don't go, oh, well, that's a weird thing in the sky. That's what UFOs are. They're unidentifiable. Some people now, because they need an explanation for that, it is an alien, or it's this, or it's something common, but you assign something to it just to, put it through your brain and try to digest it. Yeah, it's not unusual. All of us have done that, where we have come up with something that makes sense to us. It's supernatural to us nowadays may be odd because we don't believe that people can disappear, but because we have more education and we have science and we've already answered that question. Well, for Native Americans, that question wasn't answered. They didn't know at that point that things just couldn't disappear. They knew that there's something weird that was there 5 seconds ago. Now it's not there, so it must have disappeared. It must have done this. It must have done this, and then. And those things made their ways into those stories. And so what you got to figure out in some of these stories is it literally they saw it disappear, or that was just their explanation for it? And I think 99% of the time it's just their explanation for it.
Well, let me ask you, did you ever run across any stories where they indicated that they were harbingers of doom?
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of tribes today actually believe that. And it's really kind of interesting because where I am here in California, I have probably one of the most unique situations, and this is, I think, goes to your question about trading stories about Bigfoot. I'm in the Sierras, and I deal, in my job every day, I deal with the Miwok tribe. The Miwoks view Bigfoot as being a horrible, horrible monster. You don't want to have anything to do with him at all. He, in particular, has a cave that's associated with him. They believed that he would take his victims up there, eat them, and leave their bones in the cave. And sure enough, this cave had 100+ humans in it, prehistoric burials. And so I can't even give back those burials to the tribe. They don't want it. They said, that's not us, that's not our people, period. Okay, great. So now I've got these collections still in our museum because they're not going to, right now at least, we haven't talked them into taking it back. So then one tribe over, the Yokuts, Bigfoot is still a very, very critical part of who they are as a culture. He created them. That's, the paintings that I mentioned where he helped create man. He still comes to them. He's a very important part to their ceremonies. Today, if you see a Bigfoot, it means he came and got the Indian spirit and is taking that spirit to heaven. So he's very, very critical to them. So, so you would think two tribes sitting next to each other would have the same beliefs, but they don't. But universally, right now, where I'm finding is a lot of tribes are feeling that somehow, some way, Bigfoot's going to get found. And they are feeling fairly universally that that's going to be very, very bad for us as a human.
I agree with them.
Yeah, it's just, and I don't know if it means, I think I think there's twofold, and I've had many conversations, and the reasons why they feel that is not necessarily equal, but some feel it's because they have lost a habitat to the Bigfoot, then he kind of gets found because he's got nowhere else to go. We've eaten up his habitat, so he's exposed because he no longer has what he needs to survive. And And some view that it's because it'll be a sign from God that our time is done. And so it'll be like one of the last mysteries that gets exposed. When he's found to be, you can know we're at the end. And so, but it's fairly universal.
That is fascinating. A lot of us out here that feel the same way.
And it's not, and it depends on the individuals, but so far, I haven't met a Native American yet who thought that seeing a Bigfoot was a blessing. They always found that the experience wasn't good. It scared them to death, kind of this sudden thing, and that, maybe that they were doing something wrong. And in fact, one gentleman that he cries every time he tells me the story because he was deep into alcohol and drugs. And when he had this experience, it completely changed him because he felt like he was being called out. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, so I'm going to scare you into sobriety by having you have this experience. And he did straighten up his life after that. And so it just depends, I think, on what kind of mood set you're on and how you're going to view that experience. But so I can't, off the top of my head, think of a Native person who told me that it was a good thing, that they saw it,
Got a couple more questions for you, Kathy.
Sure.
Kite Squatch in the chat room, he says, do any Native American traditions talk about the Native Americans actually trading in some form with the Squatches?
Yes, there is. Some of the funnier versions is where they felt the Bigfoot was a cheater, that he would know the value. Oh, and I guess it's from their point of view, they thought that a Bigfoot was dumb and they were going to get a good deal, but the Bigfoot was wiser than they thought, and the natives felt like they got hosed instead.
Uh-huh.
And so, there's a few of that. They typically would be a food resource, and I think, I'm trying to think, there's one there in Oklahoma. There was a pretty good story that it was, I'm trying to think about what it was. That it wasn't food in that case. I think it was like shells to make beads out of, and the Bigfoots had just tons of it because they could gather a whole bunch of stuff, how much we could hold. They didn't have big blankets to carry stuff, but they could carry armloads of shell. And I think that's what they were trading back and forth, and that was out of Oklahoma. So I don't know where the shell came from, but maybe I'm wrong. I maybe I've gotten that wrong.
I have another question from Elusive One. Says, in your field, what is it going to take to prove to science that Bigfoot is real? Will it be a body, DNA, or bones, or what?
Well, it isn't going to be a film. It isn't going to be a picture anymore because, unfortunately, modern day abilities for Photoshop and costuming and stuff, it just, even if it's the best photo possible, I just cannot think of, it would have to be a very, very long film where you could see the eyes and the teeth and everything, but then somebody would still accuse you of having hoaxed it. So
Sure.
It's going to be DNA. It would be nice to have bones because, of course, that would, DNA, duh. You can get DNA out of bones, but it's going to take something like that. It's going to take some hard, definitive thing that's bones, a body, DNA without either of those, but it'd be interesting how you would do that because so far I don't think hair is coming up with any kind of answers at all, so you're pretty much going to have blood or tissue. And so how you get blood and tissue without a body, I don't know. I guess you grab a handful of something and run and somehow make it, I don't know. That's always my advice. That's what I tell my kids all the time. If you find my body, look at my hand because that's probably, got something good in it. So.
Okay. I feel like every question I ask Kathy is just totally stupid because she's so well educated and everything. But to find all this information, did you have to travel all over the United States to find this information? Did you
no, it didn't. It actually, with the modern era of the Internet, Most museums, and I have access probably to stuff that other people don't because, of my job, and I know where the archives are. And a lot of this stuff is online. Combing through, I don't even know, thousands and thousands of pieces of paper that have been scanned in or typed in and looking for them. That was actually the greatest amount of work, was doing internet searches. Yeah, and it would be helpful, having the name of the Bigfoot in advance, because then I could search for that quicker. But a lot of times I didn't know it in advance, and so I had to look through. I mean, I can't even tell you how many stories I read. I mean, it must be in the hundreds of thousands maybe not, but literally just tons of stuff. And sometimes, I would go through, I remember in particular I went through an entire archive of a state. It was the entire state's archive I went through. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing in it, and I was feeling very, very frustrated. I kept thinking there has to be one. And I think it was Kansas, and literally there was nothing from that state where it had been recorded. And so, it doesn't mean necessarily there wasn't a Bigfoot there, but just somehow, some way, it just never got written down by anybody. And I also spent, my husband in particular, Bob, spent an enormous amount of time in used bookstores looking for very, very old anthropology books that somebody had, published back in like the 1800s or early 1900s. And they'd be like, $1. There'd be like one, like every 6 months or something, but it'd be a treasure and a gold mine of having at least something to go by, or a story in it, or something to that effect. And so it took a long time, and there was a lot of work that went into it. But I think what I wanted to see was all those things together in one spot. It's like they needed to be together almost, and I kind of. In a lot of ways, I know there were a whole bunch of stuff that I even missed because I just, at some point, you have to cut yourself off and say, I can't do any more with this because I'm spent physically. And so after that, the book went to publication. I have probably enough material for another book from areas where originally I could find nothing for, like New York, New Hampshire. Some of those eastern states, I just couldn't find anything, and now I got access to a different archive, and there they were. They were sitting in there that entire time, and so that's what I was looking for. And so, and there's some places I just know I'm not going to get anything from. If there was a lot of population movement where the tribes were moved, like the Cherokee. I do have Cherokee stories. A lot of stuff was lost, and a lot of that material is broken up between a lot of different states. Some of it's held in private museums that haven't got an online archive yet, or it's maybe even that material still sitting in boxes. And so that's so there'll be an ongoing, forever kind of project as people pull that stuff out and actually dust it off and get it online or whatever. And I always had the option of going to those states, but for me, my main interest, of course, is the Pacific Northwest. And so if I've got energy and time, that's likely where I would go to museums here. And I have been to museums here, and I've been at I have a friend that he looks at historical versions, newspaper accounts of Bigfoot things. Most of them, some of them are actually really, really quite old. And then you have stuff that that is still from that pioneer period, from 49ers, gold miners and stuff that isn't in newspapers, but it's in these people's diaries. And I have found some of those as well. And so I've always been curious if that would be interesting. But I don't know. It just depends, how much time you have to do some of that stuff, but it's fascinating.
Exactly. What is the oldest story that you've read that that had a date on it?
I think the oldest one I think would be 1890. I think. Let me see. I can top of my head. A lot of them are from 1910. That seemed to be a push of when a lot of stuff. No, yeah, a lot of them are 1910. I'm trying to probably 1890, where it actually was the oldest date that was on it. I have ones where there was no date associated, but you can tell from how it was written, the language that was used, that it was very old.
Wow.
So you kind of have to judge it from that. So.
Got another question for you.
Sure.
Regina asked this question. Kathy, in your field, have you ever come across stories of giant skeletons, 8 foot plus, being found? Rumor has it that the Smithsonian housed them. Did you ever hear anything like that?
Yes. I actually live just below a mountain where one of those, I think maybe just a skull was found or something to that effect. I don't remember anymore. But I think one of the most famous incidences is supposed to have come from Lovelock Cave in Nevada, which I'm very familiar with. And there's actually a Bigfoot story associated with Lovelock Cave that I can tell you. But
Great.
It is an archaeological cave, so we know that it was excavated, and the remains that were taken out of that were housed at the Nevada State Museum, and I've seen them, and they're not at all what the story goes with it. And so I think some of that stuff, they just people see weird things, and disarticulated human skeletons can indeed look very, very large, because we forget that holding our body together is a lot of muscle and cartilage and stuff, and so when it's articulated, you have a good estimate of height and everything, but once those bones start separating, you might not in your mind really realize that it's been separated, and it may look very, very odd to people. And I think that's part of where these stories come from, because if those things really existed, where are the photographs of them? Where are the drawings? They're always just stories that don't seem to have any kind of other evidence with it. And
Exactly.
And I always want to say this. As much as people would like to believe that the government knows that Bigfoot's real, and maybe they do. I mean, I can't honestly say, but there really isn't any evidence in my mind. I work for the U.S. government on trying to hide this information. An archaeologist that got a skeleton would be the most famous person on earth, and they would go for it. Archaeologists aren't any different from anybody else. We love fame and glory, so we're not afraid of bucking the system. Archaeologists have been doing that for years, bucking the system. And so I don't see why they would want to hide it. And you know what? Who knows what's at the Smithsonian? They don't even know what they got, to be honest. I mean, they literally have warehouses and warehouses and warehouses of material, and it literally could be there, but I don't think they would be hiding it on purpose. I think it would just be, honestly, a lack of knowing what they have in their archives. And hopefully that's going to change. They're supposed to be getting some, money and changing stuff around so that they know what's going on. But as far as the one case that I'm familiar with, and actually did a lot of work on, I can't believe I can't remember. There was a skull, I think, from the Mariposa area, and I can't think of the name off the top of my head what that's called, but it's kind of a well-known where the skull kind of looked funny, and they thought it could be something else. And under the Native American,
an oblong skull. It had kind of a.
I'm having one of those moments where I can't remember now.
I've been having one all day.
Oh, but
what about the appearance of the? What is it about the appearance of that particular skull that would make someone think that it were not human?
I think it was the jaw. I think it was just a very, very strong jaw. But one of the things I'd like to remind people about is back in the 1990s, there was a law that was passed called the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act. It's called NAGPRA, so I always forget what it stands for. But it required any group, so any government agency, any museum that took government money, any university, anybody who had ever taken federal money at any time or had a federal collection, because sometimes we don't store our own stuff, they were required by law to go through everything they had that was Native American and report to the National Park Service any human remains they had. And then we then reported it to the tribe, and the tribes have the right to request those remains back. That was part of what I was talking about with the cave, with the 100 individuals. That's one of the last cases I have. So when they were going through all that stuff, they had to identify if the bones they had were human or not human. And so at that time, except for the Smithsonian actually has its own law where they didn't have to comply with that, so that's a whole other issue. But everybody else essentially had to comply with that, or they were going to be in some trouble. And so at that time, had anybody had something that was very odd, assuming it was intact, none of us are perfect. If I had, a pile of broken up bone that had some elements that look human, I'd call it human, and I probably wouldn't pay much more attention to that because you'd have to do DNA or something to show that it was something else. But if a skull or a bone was complete and you looked at it and you go, wow, that looks human or human-like, but it really is odd and it's really long and wide, at that time they had the ability to have it tested for DNA, do something else with it, figure it out. And so none of that happened that I'm aware of. I'm unaware of any time where somebody said, oh, my God, this is not human. This has got to be some other kind of primate. I'm unaware of that. Of course, maybe it's a big conspiracy and somebody kept it quiet, but I don't think so. I think they did a pretty good search, and I think if those things were already in our collections, I think we would know it. Now, we didn't have to do that for, teeth, and it wouldn't surprise me if we had teeth in collections somewhere that we just don't recognize for what it is, because for me, almost everything we do is always compared to something else. So like when I identify human remains for the local sheriff when they find stuff out in the forest, I have my little manual and I get it out and I do all my measurements. Well, I don't have a tooth that would be a Bigfoot tooth, so if somebody showed me a weird tooth, I'd go, wow, that's a weird tooth, and I wouldn't have anything to compare it to. And so it's not unusual. I wouldn't think that would surprise me if there was teeth in archaeological collections somewhere that really might be Bigfoot, but we're calling it something else because we don't know what else to call it.
Okay.
Long-winded answer to that question.
No, but I like that.
Sorry.
Let me ask you a question. You were going to tell us a story about there was a Native American story centered around that skull that was found. Do you remember?
It's centered around Lovelock Cave where they found there really were some human remains in it. And what that story is, in Sarah Winnemucca, she was the daughter of Chief Winnemucca, who was one of the last Paiutes who still had access to the land, before reservation times. And the story goes is that the Bigfoot were eating people, were eating the Paiute. And the Paiute people said to the Bigfoot, we've had enough of this, and we would like for you to stop eating our people. And the Bigfoot says, too bad, too sad. He tastes really good with ketchup, and we're not going to stop doing it. And they go, okay, we've had enough of you. And so they took all the Bigfoot, they drove them, somehow into this Lovelock Cave. And they covered the front of the cave with brush and stuff, and they said, okay, we're going to give you one last chance. We're going to kill you if you don't stop eating our people. And the Bigfoot said, we're not going to stop. Too bad. Okay, we're going to kill you then. So they set the cave on fire, the brush, killed everything that was inside, and they essentially believed that they killed every Bigfoot in Nevada. Essentially it was in that cave. And so after the smoke went away and the fire was down, some of the elders went into the cave to make sure that everything was dead, and they pulled some hair off the dead Bigfoot at that point, and that hair is woven into Sarah Winnemucca's dress. It's in my book. I have a picture of her in that dress where the Bigfoot hair is woven into. And that was just a sign that they had conquered this great evil that had been killing their people. And so I love that story. It's kind of like they tried. They said, hey, we're going to let you live if you stop eating us. And they said, nah, they're not going to. So I get the impression they're kind of stubborn.
On these stories that you tell, you talk about the animals all talk, And I noticed that when you're telling these stories, they are communicating with the Bigfoot.
Yeah, now, they almost all the, I really can't think of any, they all talk. But that's not unusual because, to me...
Everything did.
Everything talked. You know, the bald eagle talked and condor talked, and that's just... It makes it a better story. If they just grunt and nod their head a lot, it's not as much fun as saying, no, you're tasty and yummy and we'd like to eat you.
Kathy, do you have any Cherokee stories that you can elaborate on?
Yeah, I'm actually part Choctaw myself, and so I really looked hard in there, and it's... let me pull, I got my book right here, let me pull to Cherokee. And of course, you know, unfortunately they moved around a lot, and so that kind of harms how intact stories are, you know, when they're more stationary in places like in Pacific Northwest in particular has a lot because they weren't affected as early as, you know, the Cherokee and Choctaw, the Creek, and, you know, all of them that got kind of...
relocated and
let's see. Yes, there's. Let me find one of my favorite. Oh, that's one of my favorite stories. This one's about the mountain giant, and you have a mom and a daughter, and they're obviously the father of the family has died, and it was pretty traditional and native culture that it's difficult to continue to survive unless you have a man in the household because he does the hunting. And I think that's a male myth that they created these stories because we all know that women did all the gathering and stuff. So, you know, I'm just saying. Anyway, so the mom, they're starving, essentially. And the daughter's very beautiful. And so their desire, of course, is for her to marry and get fresh meat. And so Mom doesn't approve of anybody because they're not good hunters. And then so one night the daughter's, you know, praying very hard. She needs some help. She needs a good husband. And she hears this voice, and this voice says, I'm a very good hunter, and I will hunt for you. And if I hunt good for you, will you marry me? And she says, yes, I will. And so the next morning there's a fresh deer laying on her outside her door. And we're talking, you know, traditional... I don't think they'd call them teepees. I don't know what their structure would be called, but it's traditional. Mom's happy. She's happy. She says, oh, this is great. Okay, so the next night he comes back and he says, you know, so are you happy? She said, yeah. She goes, but prove it to me again. So the next day he brings her 2 deer. So they agree that she's going to marry him. So he comes back the next night and she goes, yeah, I'll marry you, but I need to see who you are. And it's the Bigfoot. And she said, well, are you disappointed? And she says, no, you're a great hunter. I'll take you. Great. So they marry in the night. And so he only comes at night and he brings food for them every day. Well, Mom starts getting suspicious and she says, who is this guy? You know, I've never met him. I've never seen him. I want to know who it is. And the daughter's all worried. She's like, oh, no, you know. She's really going to be unhappy. And so she asks her husband, my mother would like to see you. And he says to her, fine, but if she cries out and screams that I'm a Bigfoot, I'm going to leave you and I'm never going to come back. She needs to hold her tongue and be essentially grateful that I'm bringing food for you. So tell her to come early in the morning before I leave to go back into the mountains, and I'll let her see me. So the next morning, Mom comes, and of course she freaks out and screams, oh, my gosh. That's the mountain giant. That's the Bigfoot. And he said, I warned you. If you did that, I was never going to come back. And so he leaves and he never comes back. And so they cry over not having any more meat. So that's one of the great Cherokee
That's a good story.
Yeah. So
I like that.
Never scream if somebody's giving you meat. Just
no.
Hey.
Be thankful.
Yeah, be thankful. Yes. Don't worry about, who gave it to you.
That's like a classic Beauty and the Beast, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Well, and it's kind of
I like that story.
The Cherokee, they have another story. It's called The Snake with the Big Feet that in my mind was actually a Bigfoot story. And it seemed to me, and you find this in a few places, not widespread, but in a few places, where Bigfoot is an acceptable marriage partner. And not that he kidnapped you and made you marry him, because there's a lot of that going on where and in the South where you have female Bigfoots who, wait a minute, I think it's all the female Bigfoots who steal men. Yeah. Okay, now this is it always seems interesting that the human males are always, quote unquote, kidnapped. And, yeah, kidnapped. That's how that happened. Yeah, kind of getting a pattern here. But when a female marries a Bigfoot, she chose to marry that Bigfoot. And so there probably are a few other incidences of that. But there are some places where he really was an acceptable marriage partner versus in other places where obviously nobody would have wanted that. So it just differs, I think, on the location. But the Cherokee in particular have several stories of that where there's marriage involved, and he's a good partner in the sense that he's very good at providing for his spouse. So anyway.
Wow.
The snake with the big foot, huh?
Yeah, the snake with the big feet who is transformed then by a medicine man into a beautiful warrior, and then the chief's daughter marries him. But everything about the story is that it's clearly a Bigfoot. So why they use the word snake, I don't know. But anyway, but that one they actually physically changed him into being human, which means they shaved him. That's all that means.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They shaved him.
They shaved him and told him not to talk. So.
You keep bringing the meat home.
Yeah, you just keep bringing the meat home. We won't worry about anything else.
This is so fascinating. I need to ask you about this. Were there any stories about any children of the union between a Bigfoot and...
Oh yeah. That's actually who Bukwas, who is that's in the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia area. That he is the son of Duwanka, who's Whistling Woman or Wild Woman of the Woods, and a human male. And he, I always got the impression he's not very bright, because he always kind of looks like he's not bright. The way they have his facial structure, and because he's of course got masks. And I have in the book, or I probably should say this, that every story in the book is accompanied with, I don't know, there's hundreds of photographs of the native people whose stories these belong to. They were taken in the 1800s.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and with those are also the traditional costumes, and one is a Bigfoot costume, and then the masks, Bigfoot masks, totem poles, baskets that have Bigfoot woven into the baskets. So that all that artwork is also in the book, and it's really a beautiful book. I mean, I do have to say that it really is beautiful, just because it just brings to life the stories and how important Bigfoot is to them. And so Bukwas, he has the masks of him and the totem pole. You can see that he's got kind of human features in the Bigfoot features in him. And then there's a couple of other stories that where a child was produced, and it seemed like that there's something wrong with the child, I guess. I don't know how else to put it, that it's not quite right. And so, which is really kind of interesting, because if it was possible, and of course he would have to be in the homo line in order to produce a child. You have to be at least close enough related where that can happen. But you would probably suspect that it may be not a successful production. So anyway, but there's just a few, and actually there's one from, I think it's from Idaho, where the lady gave birth, but the baby didn't live. It died right after birth, and she'd been captured for about a year, I think. So and it's kind of modern. That was from like the 1920s.
We're back from intermission and back with Kathy Strain. She is absolutely a fascinating guest, and I am so glad that she decided to come on our show. Tennessee, did you say there were questions from the chat?
Yeah, we had a couple questions back here.
We also have a caller whenever y'all get around to that.
Okay. For you folks out in the chat, if you could retype those questions, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, here's one. Were the human Squatch children stories just from nearby tribes, or are those stories from separate parts of North America?
Oh, they're from all over. Yeah, they're not nearby tribes at all. They would be British Columbia area, then Idaho type area, and then I think then some of the other ones were in the south, so Alabama, Oklahoma type area. So kind of widespread, but there's not tons of them either. So it's not like a common thread that runs through stories.
We also had another question, Kathy. Are there any Ojibwe Bigfoot-related stories?
Oh yeah. They, I don't have tons of them, unfortunately, but I know that they're out there. There's one where a Bigfoot was involved in, I think it was a hunting party, and I can't remember all the details of that one in particular. But yeah, there's one or two, and I've gotten a few more since the book was published. And those are kind of hard because sometimes some of those are in French. You know, the person who recorded them are in French, and so I can't really decipher some of them. But there's some pretty good ones. Though the one that I have, I'm trying to think. I believe it was a hunting party, and the Bigfoot was interrupting, kept stealing the meat of the hunting party, and they were getting mad, and they were trying to catch him, and he was too fast for him. But that's what he was doing, was annoying the hunters by taking the meat.
You know, they still do that today. You know, you hear stories about them doing that today.
A lot of the traits that we associate, I mean, that's sort of sometimes frustrates me when people say, well, we have no idea if a Bigfoot whistles. Well, true. That is true. But it's interesting that today we associate that behavior with him on occasion. And you have traditional stories that there's no reason for them to have that in there unless they observed it. And so these stories, I view them as being ancient sighting reports, essentially. You can find stuff in these that tell you about his behavior. Now, I hope they're not kidnapping kids and eating them. I think that's an embellishment, hopefully. But things like them twisting trees, them whistling, them stealing meat, them throwing rocks, them, purposefully taunting humans to see what kind of reaction that they'll get, that's widespread through these stories. And so I think we should put some stock in that. Those aren't in there for no reason. They're there for a reason.
I just wanted to tell you, Kathy, I live about 5 miles from the Sea River, and actually about 7 miles from Shiloh National Military Park.
Oh.
On the U.S. Park property there are several large temple mounds there that are Chickasaw. I've been really interested in those mounds for the last a little over 20 years. But recently, back last fall, I was going by there because they had repaired a road that had been shut down. There was a road that went down to the mounds there alongside the river, and it had been shut down for about 12 years. And they repaired that road, and I went down in there, and it was, the middle of winter, and leaves were off and everything, but I found several territorial markers right there near those mounds, several formations, a lot of limb breaks up 10, 12 feet off the ground.
Oh.
But
and that's common, Kathy, for sign and sightings and to be found around burial mounds. And I don't know why that is.
And I think that I get asked that question. It's always a very good question of why is there always a coincidence that where Native American sites, whatever you want to, be at burial mounds, we don't have burial mounds out here in California, or around archaeological sites. And I think the best answer for that is where people have always liked to be is the same places that I think Bigfoots want to hang around too, because typically what you have is water, food. There's probably something else there that's attractive to them, and so it's the common factor of when we're going to put a campground in to on the national forest. How come it always has sites all over it? Well, because we want to be where Native people wanted to be, where I think Bigfoots want to be, because it has those special qualities.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and so I don't really think that Bigfoots know that those are burial mounds and have any kind of affiliation with it. I just think it's the Native people put that there because it was a special place to them, and it obviously is also a special place for the Bigfoot, and I think that's the most logical explanation. And you always remember that whenever, like your favorite fishing spot, probably got an archaeological site there. Your favorite place to camp is always just so happens to have Native American stuff there. That's just the way it is.
Don't we have a caller? Don't we have a caller?
couple.
Okay. Well, we need to take the caller, I think. I'm so lost without a switchboard.
Welcome, area code 828. You're on the air.
Yes, hello. It's JB here. How you doing?
Hey, JB.
Hi, JB.
Kathy, really great show. I find what you do very interesting in that I think most of us are interested in trying to find out or get some information about how long these beings have been around, and the lore, I think, of course, precedes the newspaper accounts. I've heard of medieval stories in Europe that might well be the what we know as Sasquatch. But I think the earliest I've heard, and I haven't verified this, but was Leif the Lucky Erikson. Had a report in his diary back in 1000 BC. This would have been in what I think would be Newfoundland. I don't know if anybody else has heard of this.
I've heard of it, but every time I ask for to see what it is that's written, it does. I never seem to get a hold of it. So
I haven't found it either.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I don't know that it's been confirmed. And so before I would believe it, I'd have to read the story and see, what it is that he's discussing in order to figure that one out.
Nonetheless, there have been many reports of interactions between Native Americans and these beings. Now, the question that comes to my mind is that could it not be that if in fact the Sasquatch has a language, and there's some indications that is true, could the Sasquatch not have influenced the Native American language?
Well, I believe that firmly that Bigfoot is capable of communication, because all animals, even bugs, can communicate with each other. So there's no doubt of that. But in order for him to have a form of language, well, first of all, if Bigfoot had a language of any form, it wouldn't be ubiquitous across the United States, because, of course, they've been separated from each other for a very long period of time. And that's, of course, how Native American languages work, is, maybe when they crossed over the Bering Land Bridge, they had a universal language, but the second you start breaking each other, you're away from each other, those languages change, because you're further and further apart from the mother language, as we like to refer to it. But in order for Bigfoot to have the ability to speak, he would have to have physically certain aspects, and I'm not an expert on anatomy of any sort, but his tongue, his vocal cords, everything that goes with that would have to be in place in order for that to be able to talk. And I think we've had in anthropology and archaeology, we've been having the battle back and forth of what even Neanderthal is capable of, because there's no indication based on what we have of the remains that they could or couldn't have. I don't know where that debate is this week. But you have to have certain physical things, and you have to have a reason to develop language. For most of the time humans have been on this earth, we didn't have language because you didn't need it. It's a progression of certain things, and it's kind of back to the thoughts of Bigfoot and Patty's hair being braided, or her having a digging stick in her hand, and there's certain cultural things that have to be in place for certain things to happen, and we can document it in every culture that we've ever seen. It's a progression. You don't go from being a hunter and gatherer to an agriculturalist overnight. It's
Go ahead.
Oh, it's just a progression, and so in order for Bigfoot to be able to have a language, he has to physically be able to talk. He has to have that physiology in place, and there has to be a need for that. And I'm not talking about. I mean, I'm sure there's grunting and all this other forms of communication. Whistling, I think, is a form of communication. I think wood knocking is a form of communication. But language itself has to have a purpose, and it has to have enough of you to keep it going. You can't just have words between three people. It's a community-based purpose. In order to communicate better, you come up with words or symbols that mean something so that you can get the work done the fastest, kind of thing. And so in my mind, I don't see that those elements are in place in order for that to have been there. And in order for it to have influenced natives, they came over with language already, and that's actually a piece that I have in the book as well, what language groups these tribes belong to, because again, it's going to be easier to communicate with somebody in your language group than somebody who's completely not in your language group. And we're not entirely certain if that there's really three massive language groups in the United States, so we're not entirely certain if that represents three waves into the United States, or if it's they diverted from each other at a certain time period and that kind of thing. But their languages are very, especially in Cherokee and Choctaw, they're so complicated. Navajo is one of the most complicated languages that you have, and in fact, America has more diversity of language than anywhere else in the world, and a lot of people don't know that in California in particular, we had more languages in the state of California per capita of how many people we had living at the time than any other place. And so the diversity, I think, is fascinating, and so I don't see how a Bigfoot could have, even if he could talk, how he could have influenced that. So, in my opinion,
you used a very, I thought, good term in when you said battle about all of this these possibilities. There's a linguist by the name of Scott Nelson out in Kansas City who's doing some interesting work on these Sarah Sounds tapes. Mm-hmm. Not the CDs, but the original tapes. That it seems to have some possibilities. But getting back to your archaeological, it would seem to me that I believe that the Sasquatch, just based on what information we can have, seem to have shown an intermembal index of around 90, as opposed to 70 for a human or over 100 for the great apes, which would put it into a special category, and I would think that would be significant in any kind of skeletal remains that turn up.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no doubt. If all archaeologists are trained in human remains identification, especially modern day, because it's essentially against the law, quote unquote, to excavate human remains without going through a paperwork exercise. Mm-hmm. So we're all very well trained in identifying human remains, even if they're in pieces. I usually, big enough piece I can do. If it gets real small, then I would typically stop and get out my manual, and I would stop anyway and probably go into DNA and these other tests, field tests that we have that can tell us if it's human or not. I think I am very confident enough, and I have a staff of archaeologists that work under me, that if they found something that was very unusual, they would recognize it as being human-like but not human, and it would be treated appropriately. And you know, I'm a government worker. I have no fear whatsoever that somebody's going to tell me to shut up or you're not allowed to. I have no fear of that. You know, what are you going to make me do? Stay with the government? That's awful. So I'm not worried about it. And like I said, archaeologists are, you know, Indiana Jones. He likes his press. We're all like that. And so if he found something that was going to rock the world, the person who's going to do it is going to be an archaeologist, because we love to do that. We love to find something that sets everybody else on their ear and makes them shake up. And so, and I think the hard part for people to also understand is that of the millions of people who have lived in the United States since they crossed the Bering Land Bridge, we have very few remains, because the most delicate part of anything that survives are bones. And so you have to have the right condition. Even in modern day, I mean, we don't have, do you know how many gold miners came to California during the gold rush? We don't have hardly any of their remains at all. And we build campgrounds, we do timber cells, we build roads, parking lots. I mean, California is a built environment. You know, not the mountains necessarily. We try to keep it restrained. Because soil, you have to have the right soil conditions, you have to have the right preservation, you have to have all these things that keep that bone from deteriorating and going back into the earth how it was meant to be. You know, our bodies, all bodies are meant to deteriorate. Not to mention little animals out there who see a free, you know, meal, and I might add that probably there's ketchup involved in it. When there's a body out there, they eat it, and so you don't have that stuff that gets left over. And it's not like we have every opportunity, and there's bodies all over the place, and we're just so stupid we don't recognize it. It's just you have to have so much things that all fall into place at the right time in order for those bones to be found. And I don't doubt that it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time, where you're in the right spot, the right person, right preservation conditions, and there you go. You got it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Certainly good points, all of them. I've got one further question for you, and then I'll turn it over to the hosts. Your book, is it still in print?
Oh, yeah. It just came out like in August.
Okay. Well, I was looking at Amazon, and they only had used ones there, and I was just wondering about that.
Oh, no, that's a brand new book. On Amazon, it'll say like one. You can go to Hancock House as well. That's my publisher. And so they're all brand new. I haven't seen a used one out there yet. So don't get a used one, because they're. Well,
no, this like I said, they only had showed one used one there on Amazon, and I was just wondering.
Oh. No, that's a brand new book. That is a brand new book, because the people who buy them off of Yahoo, I have a lot of people, and they'll mail it to me, and I sign it for them and mail it back. They're all brand new. So,
what's the title again now?
It's Giants, Cannibals, and Monsters, Bigfoot and Native Culture.
Yeah. Okay.
Just type in Kathy Strain.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'm certainly enjoying this, and I thank you very much, and I'll let somebody else get in here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
for calling, JB.
Thank you, JB, for calling.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We have another call. Area code 903, you're on the air.
Hey, guys, it's Mike.
Hey, Mike.
Mike.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Kathy, I can't wait to see you again in October. But I do have a question. That you said something earlier about I think it was something about learned. There was some. You were thinking. I think you were talking about talking or language being a learned thing, and I was wondering if you thought other aspects maybe also picked up a learned. They may have learned from watching the Native Americans do things, because, and the reason I'm going in this direction is because in the field. We have found a lot of these teepee-like structures with trees, with, very large trees, not something easily constructed, and very big structures. in the middle of swamps and just all these different areas, and I just want to get your take on it. I don't know that you have any idea of what it may mean or anything else, or you also said something about the tree breaks and maybe trail marking or something like that, but those structures.
Oh, yeah. You may not be aware, but age is quickly approaching me. I hope I'm getting the years correct, but back in 2000, Mantra Freitas and I found a set of footprints, and we've been watching this area for some time and had some interesting experiences, and just saying, girls rock. We're really the best Bigfooters out there, just throwing that out there. But we found, we're heading back down the road, we found a fresh tree break. I mean, so fresh, the tree was still moving, there's pebbles running down the side of the hill, and this set of footprints. And these footprints went right by exactly what you're talking about, a structure. Now, the term structure freaks everybody out all the time. They're like, only humans make structures. Okay, birds make structures, beavers make structures. Okay, it's just a term that means it's constructed. It doesn't mean that you are now the head of the pool of life and you have the right to do whatever you want to. That's not what that means. It means that you are capable, because you have fingers, to make something that keeps you out of the elements. It's just shelter. Everything uses shelter. What this one was, and if you go on to my website, bigfootresearch.com, you can find the article there. And it was a simple type of tree that was bent over. It was secured down at the bottom so that it wouldn't fling back up. And the animal, and I feel very confident in saying this, and I think if Mantra was here, she'd agree with me, as that it was very clear that the Bigfoot was responsible for this. It had taken some tree limbs that had been cut by the landowner. This was private land. The landowner, years before, had done some tree clearing and left some limbs sitting, and all that Bigfoot did was to make it even more of a windbreak sort of thing, had taken these branches and shoved them in there, and it was kind of a woven type thing, but not like weaving as in making a basket or making a rug. Don't everybody get upset about that term. It's just a term. And and was using it, and they had put mosses and stuff in the inside, taken all the rocks out of it, and then put moss and stuff down at the bottom. And so, that's not a complicated thing, and I don't necessarily know that they would have had to observe Native Americans doing that, because, of course, if you think about today, there aren't people using the landscapes like they were back 100 years ago. So in your area, there would be nobody for a Bigfoot to emulate to create something. Right. So that's just them being smart enough to know that if I sit out in the rain, I'm going to get cold, I'm going to get sick. It's not good for my babies to have them out in that kind of weather condition. And so it makes sense to me. Now, what your job is as a researcher is to use scientific methods to eliminate every other possibility of what could be creating it before you make a determination that it might be Bigfoot-related. And so, and that's... was that for me? That was interesting.
That was weird.
Yeah, she's rude, too. She always talks over me. But that's what you're looking for. You're looking for footprints. The biggest caution that Mantra and I would probably give anybody is don't enter that structure until you feel that it's been abandoned, because you in there will leave your scent, and that animal will leave that structure. Your job, it's a sanctuary. I would not take my babies back into a spot where I thought you had been, because my entire being is to make sure those kids grow up to be adults. So you have now violated my sanctuary. So your job is you find it's neat, put up cameras, stay away from it. When you find out then that it's probably abandoned, then you need to go in there, make sure you have a hairnet, make sure you wear gloves, and you're going to go through that like a fine-tooth comb, looking for teeth, looking for hairs, looking for whatever it is that you're doing. And then then you can start making some conclusions from that. So, and I haven't seen the pictures of the ones that you've had, but I definitely have seen some very interesting things out there that are, I have a lot of confidence that it's not just some Boy Scout out there, building things.
Right.
With them. So you have great advice. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and it's all, hey, believe me, I always take advice from people I admire. So, The other thing is, I think I sent Laurie in Tennessee the pictures of the tree bow.
Yes.
That was, they can vouch for this. This was a very large tree, not so much in diameter, but very tall, and it was pulled over, and the top of the tree was pulled over next to another larger tree, and then the trunk of another tree that had been drugged to this location, it was not from that location, was wedged down between the two to hold it in place. Now, what this means, I have no idea, but I'm a pretty good-sized guy, and we had three of us pulling on another tree of similar size to try to duplicate it, and all we did was manage to just wiggle it back and forth. We couldn't, bend it down. Would that be something that you would feel would be sort of like the tree breaks, the limb twists?
It's difficult to say because, of course, Bigfoots are not going to do the same behaviors in the same places or different places.
Oh, right.
Because it's like, I've been in places where they scream constantly and other places where they don't do anything at all, and other places where you find tree breaks and other places you don't. So your first thing is to make sure it's documented through photographs, through measurements, through drawings, and then you need to watch that place and see, are you seeing repeated patterns, any kind of thing like that. But you also have to think through what, and of course we can't think like a Bigfoot because we have modern technology and we wouldn't necessarily do the same things that way because we can go to the grocery store and we have, blankets and stuff. So you want to kind of put yourself into that frame of mind. What could it be that this is representing? And then and never get into. The other thing I always like to tell people is pay attention what time of year it is that these things are happening, because it's not just documenting it, size, direction it's laying, all these factors. And again, on the website, you can find a paper that I wrote about using archaeological methods to record this data, because you're never going to see patterns until you start recording things on a regular basis, and that includes time of day, year, season, all these things, because I don't think they're random. I think they're patterns, and we're missing the patterns because we're not noting these things, and maybe it's not Bigfoot related, but maybe you find something in the newspaper that says a Boy Scout club was in that area at that time period. That's the kind of thing you're looking for. It's just those kinds of things. But, what it could represent, I think, is an interesting perspective as well, is that humans do all kinds of stuff, but there's other animals, too. There's bears, there's dogs, coyotes that do very strange things. And so it's always good to familiarize yourself with other animals, but you also need to know your location. And I've always been against, I have friends that they go Bigfooting in 12 different places 12 times a year. And you think to yourself, but you don't know that area. Right. You don't know what's different, what's wrong. You don't know the animals. You don't know the sounds. You don't know the behaviors. And that's critical to know. And that's why we Bigfoot in our backyard, because we know that land. We know what it is. And so that's the kind of thing. And so record the data, take lots of photographs, draw it if you can, use that tool that I told you, the paper, measure it. And I used to teach a class. We used to have an Operation Odyssey where with Mantra and my husband Bob, where we taught the public, Bigfoot researchers, how to use scientific methods in order to record that data. Because even if you're wrong, say you find out later it's a Boy Scout who did it, then so what? You can throw it away. But what if it really was a Bigfoot and you didn't record any of it?
Right.
You just now, I like to say that you hose science out of information because you chose not to record it. You can always be wrong, but it's almost impossible to go back. So record it and continue to visit those areas and see if you're starting to see patterns. Put it on a map. You know,
well,
this is here.
Yeah, we're going to be there 2 weeks. We're going to be there in 2 weeks. So same spot, same location. We've been going to the same spot for a while now. So.
Okay. Well, and I think that's the wisest thing to do. And look for just, you know, what is he up to? You know, maybe it's as simple as he was intimidated by you guys being there, and he's trying to get you to move.
Yeah. Well,
no? Hey,
we didn't.
So I'd be afraid of me. I'd move if I were you. I don't think that's all that uncommon.
No. Hey, Kathy, great show. As always, very, very interesting. And like I said, I look forward to seeing you in Honubby. And
in October.
I've got to
get a speaker at Honubby.
Yeah, she's going to be there with.
I put that in there, but I just haven't done it yet. I apologize.
From what I've seen on the chat room, she's going to be traveling quite a bit. She's going to be in Ohio and some other places.
No,
several.
Not in Ohio.
Oh, wherever it was. I'm missing.
I'm going to be up in Washington at the Yakima Roundup with Bob in May.
Yeah,
hey.
And I thought there was something. I thought there was going to be one somewhere else. I thought somebody said something about it, but
no, just those two for right now.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing you. Have already got an order placed for your book. Want to be able to sit back and read it and speak to you intelligently about it, and
great!
And I can't wait. And if anybody's listening, if you have not seen Kathy's presentation in person, you gotta see it. I don't care where you gotta go to see it. You gotta see it. It's really amazing stuff.
I'm going to see her in person.
It is amazing. Thanks, Kathy.
You're more than welcome. I do something different for each location. So based on what is the interest of those people, you know, that kind of thing. So, but I'm always good.
I'll talk to you guys later, Laurie.
All right.
Tennessee.
Thanks
and thanks again, Kathy. Oh, no problem. Thanks, guys.
All right, bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I have a question. If there's no one in the chat that has one, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Kathy, do you think they have artistic ability? I know you're probably going to say, well, why would they need artistic ability?
And that is exactly what I would say. Because, again, you know, think it through as a need. So if back in the day when we had to live off the land, so thousands of years ago, all your time is spent getting food because you have to have shelter, you have to have water, and you have to have food. When it's just me, you know, maybe I'm just eating a little bit of food, but, you know, you got a spouse and you got kids, and then you probably have your oldest daughter and her husband and their kids, and so there's a lot of work that goes into getting food. It's not unless you're an agriculturalist, you know, working the land and getting different kinds of berries and tubers and roots takes a lot of time, as well as then obtaining meat through, you know, hunting deer and stuff. So artistic, I mean, we may all be born with some natural instinct towards that, but in order to elaborate on artistic abilities, you have to have the time. And not only the time, our understanding of artistic abilities, and I'm not saying like singing, because of course you can sing and work at the same time, and that may very be possible. But I don't know that we necessarily see that in other grade 8s. But the ability to paint on walls, to baskets are a form of artistic expression, as well as being, you know, useful and functional. Making clay figurines, that kind of thing. That all takes time out of your day that you should be spending getting food. And if you weigh 800 pounds, you're going to need more calories than somebody that's, you know, in the 100-pound range or the human range. And so I just don't see it happening. And we don't find, you know, like I said, I'm got a staff of archaeologists. I'm in the field all the time. We don't find those types of things. You know, if Bigfoot was creating those types of things, I think at some point we would have found something that would have represented that, and we would have found it odd because, and we can recognize ancient stuff versus modern stuff. That's actually pretty easy to do. And so, outside of maybe singing, which, I think would be a natural instinct to, if you can grunt, you'd probably hum. That wouldn't surprise me, but, it wouldn't have lyrics or probably anything anybody would want to hear.
Kathy, I have several other questions here for you.
Sure.
Irish guy says, do you think Bigfoot are tribal, clannish, or just loose familial groups?
Well, that's been a debate for some time. What we've noticed, and I don't know what people know about me and my history, but I'm not just a researcher of Native American stories. We put in an enormous amount of field work doing Bigfooting, and that's what we do. My husband spent almost all spring, summer, and fall of 2008 in the field. I wouldn't let him come home. I said, "You bring me a Bigfoot or you're not coming home." So I finally let him home.
With ketchup.
Yeah, poor guy. He's like, "Oh, I'm lonely. I don't want to."
Poor Bob.
Yeah, poor Bob. So we have a group that we Bigfoot with, and so we spend a lot of time out there. And so what I mentioned earlier about the nest that Mantra and I had found, our distinct impression of what was going on with that, because there was other strange things. There were tree breaks, there were callings, howls and stuff, and mischievous things that were going on. Well, our impression, just because we were only finding one size of footprints and they really weren't that large, the impression we had was that was a young adult male that had been pushed or thrown out, as you will, the good habitat that was being held by probably a dominant male. And this was what was left over, because it was okay territory, but it certainly wasn't the place I'd be if I was a Bigfoot. There was food and there was fish and there was some water right there, a nice ditch system. That's how us here in the foothills still get our water out of ditch water. And so that was the impression. And so I know Grover Krantz and others have for some time felt that their how they live is a dominant male in probably a lot bigger territory than we really think, and then several females, and then their children. And then as a male gets old enough to start challenging the older male, I think they get kicked out, and they have to go find their other territories that's available. And we're not talking about hundreds of Bigfoots in a location. You're probably talking, my national forest, somewhere between 10 to 20, if that. And so that's how I think that they would live. I don't think there's a good comfort in large groups, and I don't know that there's been a whole bunch of examples of family groups being cited. But it's kind of interesting. The very few that you have has been a male, a female, and a young one. And the pictographs that I mentioned that are on the Yokits reservation above Porterville, California, that's actually what the pictograph shows, is a large male Bigfoot, and literally painted 8 feet tall. Literally. It literally is 8 feet tall. And then his wife is next to him. They call her Mama Bigfoot. She's about 6 foot, and then she's like guarding the baby from the daddy. So she's got him over on her right side, like a buffer zone, because they're kind of distant from each other in the painting, and he's about 4 feet tall. And so, and there's a few sightings of family groups, and it always seemed like Mom was protecting the baby from the dad. So I suspect that the mom is a more loving type. Of course, not. I'm just throwing that in there. but anyway, there's very few examples where they've been seen. And I think if that was a common family type, how they actually moved on the landscape, I think there'd be more sightings. And most sightings are individuals, at best. So that's my answer to that.
We do have another call, Kathy.
Okay.
Okay. Area code 913, you're on the air.
Thank you for taking my call. Hi, Kathy. My name is Randy.
Hi, Randy.
And just like the previous caller before me, Mike, I too am very much looking forward to seeing your presentation at Honevi this year. I'm very interested in the Native American stories that you have access to. I don't know how many stories you've read. I would say probably hundreds or heard. And the one question that I have, we spoke with a lady by a lake in northeast Oklahoma who said that she witnessed a female Bigfoot slap her leg, and two young ones that were getting too far away from her immediately ran up to her, and each one grabbed her leg. And there was no vocalizations. There was nothing, because the female Bigfoot was eating fruit off a tree at the time, and that would indicate to me a disciplining of their young. And I was just wondering, through all the database of stories that you have heard from the Native Americans that have had interactions, and even though all of these stories are basically these people's interpretation of their interaction with these animals, but still, there's some truth to it. Is there any that would involve any type of the young being disciplined? And I'll just leave that with you, and I'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you for taking my call.
Okay.
Thank you very much for calling.
Now, that's an interesting question. Off the top of my head, I cannot think of a single story that I've heard where a mother disciplined the baby. Now, I do have stories in the book about the mother being very loving and kind to her child. And one story in particular, at Dewanka again, and Bukwas was a baby, and she had him in some grasses, but lovingly placed there while she was gathering some fruit. And a human male hunter found the baby, and for whatever reason was picking on the baby, pinching his toes and making the baby cry, and it made Mama really upset. And so I don't think that guy was around very long. But there's other incidences where she took when a female had no child of her own, and she took a human baby. The indications were that she was a good mom to it, that she loved him, and the baby, when the child grew up and realized that they had been kidnapped, there's a great one, the Stimaha is a wonderful story about that these two children had been kidnapped and raised as a Bigfoot, and they didn't know they were human until they were around their father's camp one night, and the father said out loud, "Leave me alone, Stimaha. You took my children," and named the children. And the children recognized their names, and they realized that they were human. And so they showed themselves to their father, and the father, of course, was overwhelmed with praise. Oh, my kids are home. And but every indication was that they had been treated very well and very well loved, and had no desire to run away. So the times where they're not so nice, I guess, is when they're cannibals and you're just a food resource, and so there's no reason to treat you nice. They're going to eat you anyway. Or they seem to have this playful where they like to torture you, like throwing rocks and that kind of thing. And so there's all these elements about these, and it may come down to personality that, just like anybody could be a bad mom, that's, I don't necessarily know that her slapping her thigh would be discipline. She's saying, "I love you. Please come back and be closer to me so I can watch you and keep you safe." And I think any mother would do that. And there's been speculation for a long time that what you're seeing in the Patterson-Gimlin film is a mama who had a baby, set down the baby, and is trying to get the cowboys away from her child. That she's making herself a decoy in order to keep her child safe. And so,
I agree with you on that, Kathy, because in one of those frames, I have seen what I think is a child down in some deadfall. Mm-hmm. And I saw this 8 years ago. And so every time I hear someone say that, I think, I remember what I saw, in that one frame. and she was walking away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Literally walking away from it.
Yeah,
so,
and unfortunately, we're never going to know. Unfortunately, never really know that answer. But it wouldn't surprise me at all, because it's as annoying as our teenagers are. And, yours being an exception, because I'm sure Lauren isn't at all annoying.
You didn't
I have
know her
boys.
2 years ago.
As much as we think about that, it is important to all animals. If any of you know horses and wild horses, and, that they will kill the young of another stallion's baby, because he wants to have his DNA. It's an instinct. That's what he wants. He wants his DNA to survive. And I don't think Bigfoots are popping out babies, 3 or 4 times a year. They're going through a long gestation. You get one maybe every 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So you're going to do whatever you can to keep that baby safe. And, now whether it's loving discipline or, harsh discipline, I think that may be more based on the personality of the animal. I mean, and it's kind of like sometimes I often wonder if the Miwok disliked Bigfoot so strongly is because they had a Bigfoot with a really bad personality, or what? Did they happen to get the Bigfoot who liked to eat people, and so they had a bad relationship, and the Yokas lucked out and had the vegetarian Bigfoot? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how those mix. I just know those are the stories, and what patterns they have in them. There's some basics, about wood knocking and blah, blah, and all that stuff with that. But as far as why some are bad, some are good, some tribes fear them, some tribes love them, I can't seem to figure that one out.
Were there any stories about them carrying a knocking stick?
Wood knocking is mentioned in several stories, that they would know they were talking to each other when they were doing that. They go, there they are, they're talking. And it's kind of like the tree breaks, that they would know they were in his territory when they saw those. Their thought, of course, was that they were territorial markers, and they thought that's the only reason they did that. But the wood knocking was just something. It's the same with whistling. They clearly recognized whistling in the dark was a Bigfoot-related behavior, and that was not a good thing at all. You never went outside if you heard the whistling.
There's some that believe that they migrate.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any stories indicating that they did a migration, or that they had community gatherings where they met mates and things like that?
No. Yeah, none of that, where there was, at the most you'd have, in the case where in Nevada where they killed them off, they kind of indicated they kind of herded them together. So most stories, you have 1 or 2 at the most in the story. Now, I have a story that isn't in here that deals with the Lake Tahoe area, where there seemed to be more of them together, but they came together to war with humans. It was these big battles they were having, and so they united in that kind of frame. But most of the time, the stories are 1 or 2, and I think there's like one story about migration, and I believe it's the Choctaw, who say that the Bigfoot used to live where the Choctaw are now, but they're not there anymore, and they think they migrated west to go west, and that's the only one there is like that. Most of the time, they don't discuss. They may come up and down the mountain based on snow, which isn't true migration. It's just a form of survival. Get out of the snow line. But as far as like they saying that Bigfoot must have come far away from Canada, there's none of that. So, but
what
one
about
explanation.
What about any stories? When in 1865, when the Indians were forced to move to Oklahoma,
mm-hmm.
Were there any stories that the Bigfoot followed them?
I think that's where I think the only thing is that was the Choctaw. I don't remember now off the top of my head, but no, they didn't think that they did not believe that it was the same Bigfoot where they had been before. They recognized that this was a new, that Bigfoot lives everywhere, is what they thought, but that they're not there anymore. They don't see them anymore because they think they went west. And so, which is kind of interesting because I don't really know what the sighting. I think there's still sightings in Cherokee and Choctaw territory. So I don't really know what that thinks. But at some time period there must have been a lax of sightings, and they just assumed they had moved away. But the Miwok here have that. They used to believe that there was a Bigfoot that lived on their reservation that was a bad one, that was really, they just don't really like Bigfoots here in this territory. And they didn't think he moved too far. They just think he went uphill somewhere because he hasn't been around for about 10 years, I guess. They haven't seen him on the reservation for about 10 years. And so they think he just went higher up in the mountains, but not to another state or anything. They think he just had enough with them. And they're glad about it, too. And I'm like, sure, he leaves the second I start hanging around. Lucky for me. I'm not going to take it personal.
What about any indication that they were good or evil beings?
Well, definitely evil is they have a lot of names associated with this, like devil, where they really felt they were bad individuals. And, and Native Americans typically see things neutral in the sense of God created all of us. And so they're not really into saying, you're a bad spirit, kind of thing. You can lose your way, but you can come back. And so there definitely are some ones where they said you're just evil and you're not good, and they called them devils, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it. And then there are some, of course, you would think you were a good being if you were willing to marry them, on purpose. And of course, in several stories, on purpose, yeah, not being forced to. But there are several other stories where he is actually the creator of man. That had it not been for him, humans wouldn't be in the form that they are. I mean, that's one of the most charming stories about Bigfoot. The pictographs was Coyote wanted us to walk on all fours, and Hairy Man said no. Humans need to walk on two legs like I do. They're very special. And so Coyote was going to get his way because he's, always the big, boss and tells everybody what to do. And so he challenged him to a race. And Coyote cheats, because he always does, and Hairy Man knew he was going to do that. And so he went ahead and let Coyote pretend like he was going to run with him. He stayed behind, and he created man to walk on 2 feet. And so, that tells me that he's a very, for them, a very kind individual. That's very important to them because, and like I said, for the Yokuts, Bigfoot has to come and get your spirit to take you to heaven. And so if he doesn't come, the Yokuts you're not going to heaven. And so obviously to them, he's very, very important and very spiritual and very much part of God.
Kathy, we have just enjoyed you being here so much.
Oh, I've enjoyed it.
I know. It's just flown by, and I've learned so much. And it's just been really exciting. And we'd love to have you back.
Oh, at any time.
I know you've got 2 more hours of stuff to tell us. I know you do.
The worst part is when everybody figures that I was making all of it up. No, I'm kidding.
Lady.
I'm just kidding.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for coming.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It really was a pleasure.
Yes, ma'am.
We're going to go ahead and sign off, everybody, and we thank you all for coming. Be sure to tune in Thursday night for our show. We're having a Thursday night pre-recording show for Easter Sunday. Check the Blog Talk page for that. And Kathy, thanks for coming.
Right, thank you.
Good night, Tennessee, and good night, Lauren.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. If you have time, please go by our comments page and leave us a comment. Thank you very much.
Is anybody still here?
I am.
Kathy, are you still here? Did you hang up?
Kathy hung up. She's not on there anymore.
Oh, I haven't lost that switchboard. I think it was a wonderful show.
Yeah, it was a good show.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to get off of here and rest my voice, so I'm about to lose it.
Don't you be going over there to Bears territory.
You're still on the air. I will see you later.
All right, good night.
Good night. Good night.